God kveld. Det som går tapt. Velkommen til møte i Filosofisk poliklinikk. Vi skal diskutere hva som kan ofres under en pandemi. Det blir først musikk i 3-4 minutter, og deretter starter samtalen. Etter musikkinnslaget så kommer hele møtet til å foregå på engelsk. Men først musikk. Mange Skrede, vær så god.
Vi kaller det sang, ja, men det er greit. 3 små viser. Det er så fagert i finne slottet og sittja brun. Det er då fagrar i mjølnde fjellet, der skiner så vakker ei morgonsol. Snilda håndfru, tilta, tilta, tiltu. I gymeskaren gang eg såg ei møy ho meg hugstall, arma lyste så låga leika kring om himmel, all og hav. Lange natt ei, lengre to, koss kan tri meg trøyte, mer enn en min månad mindre tottest, en halve i natti som for. Og tussekallen satt opp i glurven ut, og skreik på islasveinane sine, og skundek nok om heimat både ku og sau og stut, og alle kussikalvane mine. Kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku. Til helgamesse fyller jeg 700 år, Gud hjelpe meg elendige trave, og giktbråten er jeg både i legg og i lår, og ryggen min er krokut som en klave. Kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku. Men dere skulle sett med den gangen jeg tok tak, med rise jo en gneldre kalvette. Jeg slengde han i gulvet med dunder og brak, så gjorde i skolv i 4 veker etter. Kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku. Men nå som jeg er maktesløs, i foten og i armen, dreg meg fram på 4 som en gammel migemaur, og knapt nå kan jeg halda senje varmen, og knapt nå kan jeg halda senje varmen. Kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku-ku-ku, kusi-ku. Sånn, takk for meg.
Welcome, everyone. We are going to discuss losses. We're going to discuss what are we willing to sacrifice under a pandemic. In a moment, I'm going to introduce the invited guests. But first, a few housekeeping issues. This meeting is being held in Litteraturhuset in Bergen. It's also being streamed, hence the cameras and the lights. The streaming can be found on the web page of Filosofisk poliklinikk and on YouTube. And on YouTube, the recording of this meeting will be made available afterwards. There will be a conversation between me and 3 invited guests. Afterwards, I will open up for comments and questions from the audience who are here in this room. It will also be possible during the discussion to submit questions and comment on our YouTube channel, and Caroline will relay those to discussion afterwards, so you can anonymously contribute questions and comments through our YouTube YouTube channel. When we come to questions and comments, the streaming will stop. And I'm saying this especially to those of you who are here with me in person in the auditorium. When it comes to questions and comments, please feel free to participate. There will be no streaming, no recording of that part. Now to the invited guests. I will start with the one who's the reason why we are holding this meeting in English. Iona Heath, to the right on the TV screen seen from the auditorium. Iona is a doctor who lives in London. She used to work as a general practitioner. Iona also writes books and articles. And this spring, there was an interview with Iona in the Norwegian newspaper Morgenbladet. And I will say a few more words about the contents of the interview in a moment. I have known Iona for many years, but it was this interview in Morgenbladet that made me realize that I should ask Iona to participate in today's meeting. Good evening, Iona. I'm very grateful that you said yes to be with us tonight. Can you hear me?
I think she has frozen.
Yeah. I hope we can solve the technical issue there. The second invited guest, Tone Smitsbach. Tone is a Norwegian who lives in Vienna in Austria. Tone has a PhD in ecological economics. Tone also had an important article in the newspaper this spring, or in several Norwegian newspapers, spring or early summer perhaps it was, and I will get to that a bit later on. But first, hello Tone, and how are things in Vienna?
Hello. Things are fine in Vienna. So it's safe and nice to be here, although it would have been even better to be with you in Bergen. But as I don't fly for environmental reasons, it's very complicated to travel across Europe these days. So I will take it from here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're with us. Now, a moment to see if Iona Heath can join us. Iona is there. I did tell the audience that there was an interview with you in the Norwegian newspaper Morgenbladet. I did not tell them anything about the contents of the interview in Morgenbladet yet, except that it was the interview that made me realize I should invite you to be with us tonight, Iona. I'm very happy you're with us. I'm even more happy if you can make some sounds. Are you there?
I am there now. I had to go out and come in again. Sorry it took me so long to... I had to get some help from a young person to tell me what to do to get back in.
Oh, give my best to that young person. So tell the young person I'm grateful. So the third invited guest tonight is Katrine Meisfjord. Katrine works with the Church City Mission in Bergen, Kirkens Bymission. Katrine, good to have you here. I must say that I'm glad you're actually here and not just on screen. And I must be honest and say that I'm very glad you could make it. One of your colleagues was going to come here tonight, but she got ill last night. And thank you for stepping in on such a short notice, Katrine, and welcome. You must have been surprised this morning when your colleague asked you to step in for her.
Yes. I think I got a forewarning when I didn't hear her on the radio this morning, as announced. And then an hour later, I heard that she was sick. And it dawned on me that I might be the next in line for presenting this story here tonight. So, but no panic. We have all been contributing to these stories. And these are stories from people that we work with every day and every week. So it's nice to share those stories.
Yes, and I'm glad you could step in, especially since without the stories, and we'll get to that in a moment, this meeting would definitely not have been the same. Now, to explain the topic tonight, a pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, that is an emergency, it's a crisis. And in a crisis, the things that we value highly are threatened. Crisis, emergency, that threatens things that we hold dear. We risk losing what we hold dear, and since we are about to lose what we hold dear, we take emergency measures. And this meeting is about the losses. What have we lost? What have we managed to protect? What price have we paid for protecting what we hold dear? Whom have we protected, and who have paid the price? This is our topic tonight. Katrine, you mentioned stories. The Church City Mission provides help for vulnerable people, and I have asked you to share 3 stories about people who are unusually vulnerable and who have had their lives made even more difficult since March this year. So you're going to share 3 stories, one at a time, and we'll have a discussion with Tone and Iona in between the stories. And there are losses in each of these stories. Just to make it clear, none of the persons we will be hearing about do actually exist as such, but their stories consist of bits and pieces of real-life stories and experiences of flesh and blood people whom you at the Church City Mission meet on a daily basis. I think the first story is about a woman called Mary. Is that right?
Yes.
Please.
I have to read. Sorry about that. Mary. Mary is 42 years old. She grew up in East Africa and came to Norway 10 years ago. She struggled to find a job. After a year of unemployment, she started selling sex as a last resort. She provides for her 2 children and for her elderly parents who live in her hometown. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly worsened Mary's situation. She wanted to go home to East Africa to take care of her family, but could not afford the ticket. She worries for her children and parents and has trouble eating and sleeping due to her anxious state. Mary's income dropped significantly in the months during and after the lockdown. A temporary ban on prostitution was issued early in March, but nothing was done to compensate her loss of income. The ban also caused fear of being arrested, thus increased the feeling of insecurity and ambivalence Mary experienced when approaching customers. To compensate the loss of income, Mary lowered her rates by 50% and agreed to take part in more risky sexual practices, like sex without a condom. Under normal circumstances, she selects only the clients who agree to safe sex. This is a luxury she could not afford during the lockdown, leaving her more vulnerable to sexual abuse and STDs. Mary also tells us that she felt extra vulnerable and exposed during the lockdown. The city center was deserted. She had little access to important information about the pandemic and the virus. This caused additional stress and anxiety. For several weeks during lockdown, the employees in Kirkens Bymission's pro team were the only people she met, except for her customers. Once a week, pro team provided information about infection control and government decisions related to the pandemic, and handed out condoms, thus seeking to support Mary and provide a certain amount of security.
Thank you, Katrine. We will leave Mary there. Now, Iona, I want to ask you about the interview with you in Morgenbladet that was printed in May this year. And I'm going to explain a little bit to the audience about the interview. The title translated into English, I mean, English person interviewed in English, translated into Norwegian, and then I'm translating the title back into English. I'd rather die from COVID than not having visitors. That's how my translation of the title. I'd rather die from COVID than not have visitors. There's a little story behind this. Now, Morgenbladet has a journalist called whose name is Aslak Bonde, and Aslak Bonde lost his mother this spring. She was 95 when she died, and she was living in a nursing home, in a care home. And Aslak Bonde wrote about her dying in the nursing home, and one of the things he wrote was the worst thing about not being able to be with his mother. It was not so much about the exact moment of death, when she finally died, but about the final weeks of his mother's life, that he was not there for her, and he was not there to somehow participate in her dying. And following the publication of Aslak Bonde's piece about experiencing the death of his mother this spring, Morgenbladet interviewed you, Iona. You've been very outspoken about death and about love and touch. And one of the things you said is that we are all going to die eventually, but now, during this pandemic, it's almost as if nobody can be allowed to die at all. What do you mean by that?
Well, let me just clarify. I think in the interview I actually said, and I've certainly said it since, I think I actually said I'd rather die than not be able to hug my grandchildren. This is because I think that we are doing devastating things to our humanity, and we're doing devastating things to dying people, and we're creating an epidemic of a pathological bereavement. People who had to know that their loved one was dying alone and they couldn't get to them, and it's just awful. I've got an echo again, just so that you could tell the technical people. What has happened in the UK is that we have had a whole load of unexpected deaths at home. And I think that this is people who are deciding that they don't want hospital care if it means that they will not be able to, that they kind of go into solitary confinement, which of course is a major league punishment. You know, people's spirits are broken by political dictators by being put in solitary confinement. And yet we are doing that. And I think you are in Norway too, to old people in care homes who are already often disoriented and distressed. And contact with their closest family members is the only thing that keeps them in touch with reality. So I think this is a quite terrible thing. And I think it's wrong to say that you're not allowed to die. What you're not allowed to die of is COVID. you know, because we've got this, and I'd like to hear what Tony says about this later, because I think we've got this terrible league table of deaths. I mean, you know, we lead it. So, you know, we're the champions, really. We're certainly the champions of Europe in terms of COVID deaths. But it's become a political liability. And therefore, you do such destructive things, destroying people's livelihoods, ruining people's childhoods. The experience of going to university, certainly in the UK, has become something quite horrific. And what are we actually trying to achieve? The extraordinary thing is, I don't know whether I can. We're well into the second wave in the UK. Can I share my screen? Shall I try? I'm just going to try to share my screen. Give me a sec, because I want to show you this amazing diagram from, yeah, oh no, how do I do this again? Hold on. I'm going to need another young person to help me in a minute. I think, can I do this?
I was thinking about this younger person in your house, but actually, Iona, if you share your screen, it will be small for the audience who is here.
Yeah, I can't do it anyway. But what
Not without the younger person.
No, and the younger person has disappeared. It's a Florence Nightingale diagram and she made diagrams over time, you know, circular diagrams of death rates. And we've got a huge bulge in April. But now, and ever since June, maybe beginning of June, the death rate is exactly normal. It's running around on the average. The same number of people are dying. More of them are dying of COVID, but the same number of people are dying. And yet we are devastating people's lives. And it feels wrong to me that we're doing this. And Stefán, you know, I've been particularly exercised. Now I said I want to, don't allow, go away. Exercised by my own generation. Okay, I was born in 1950, and we're the baby boomer generation. And my kids tell me frequently, we have had it all. You know, we've had no European wars, except in the Balkans, which was not really affecting my generation in Western Europe. And then we've had free education, we've had free university education, we've had high employment, we've got high pensions. We have been an incredibly privileged generation. And there's an issue of generational justice in this.
Would you repeat the concept? Generational justice.
Justice,
yeah.
fairness between generations. So a generation who is, you know, turning 70 years, the biblical length of life, 70. And yet all this is happening to try and keep people alive for longer at a terrible price to children and young people. And I personally feel very uncomfortable about it. And I don't really want to be party to that. You know, I'm prepared, you know, I wear a mask outside to protect other people. I try to be sensible. I would have come to Norway like a shot if you hadn't got quarantine, locking me up for 2 weeks or whatever you do.
Would you say, Iona, that the pandemic or our handling of the pandemic is creating a polarization between generations, between the younger and the older people in society now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think the children understand what's happening to them, but I think young adults and university students certainly understand what is happening to them. And even just to go back to the story, I mean, that sort of story must be replicated in every major city across the whole of Europe. And that is taking the most disadvantaged people in society and deliberately making their situation worse. And then if you go, tell me to shut up when you want me to, Stefan. Then we go to the care homes. I talked to a group of GPs by Zoom, of course, in Northern Ireland fairly recently. And this is another story. So it's a story about a very old lady in a care home with dementia, visited and fed every single day by her husband, who was then banned from visiting, and she died within a week. And he said, she didn't die of COVID, she died of loneliness. And I don't know why there hasn't been a human rights challenge about solitary confinement for old people in care homes. And the person who interviewed me for the newspaper in Norway told me that was happening in Norway too. And you've hardly got a death rate worth speaking of. I mean, you know, I'm sure it's not bigger than, I can understand you want to quarantine virus-infected foreigners coming from abroad, but I don't understand why you're locking up your old people when you clearly don't have much of a prevalence.
So the death rate has been much lower in Norway than in the UK, and I guess some of the effects of the protective measures are easier to see in your country. I was thinking about polarization, not just between generations, but also the polarization that was demonstrated by the story of Mary. The disease goes for the disadvantage, and I think this may have been easier to spot in your country than here in Norway. More people have died. More people have died in nursing homes, but not even death rates between different nursing homes have been random in the UK. You mentioned to me that there is a certain pattern to which nursing homes have been hit most badly by the virus. Would you mind explaining?
And it will surprise nobody to learn that the nursing homes which paid staff sick leave had a much lower death rate than the nursing homes which did not pay sick leave. So obviously this is a very low pay sector, and you have people who could not afford to stay off work if they were going to feed their children. So it's absolutely a difference between those two sorts of nursing homes. So and I feel very despairing, really, about the sort of competitiveness that has happened, both for politicians about what their death rates are and what they're doing about it, and who can lock down for longest, and who can lock down more extremely, and isn't Sweden terrible, and etc., etc. And then the sort of academic competitiveness about masks and the distance between people, and we did all sorts of fundamental things wrong. Not the delay in the lockdown, I don't think necessarily, but not quarantining until it was much too late, when we had plenty of time to quarantine properly, and to quarantine like they do I don't know what you do in Norway, but in Australia and New Zealand, you're quarantined in a hotel with food provided. You don't have to go out and shop to live for the 2 weeks, which people do here, what's the point? And separating COVID patients from ordinary hospital patients. So we built a huge hospital, emergency hospital, then hardly used it, put all the COVID patients into the main hospitals, So lots of people got it there, but then lots of people had their treatments and their operations and their dialysis and everything else put back and delayed. And so the legacy of, so you're prioritizing one disease over another. You're not allowed, you can die of anything, but not COVID in terms of politics. I think it's time you moved on. I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to put one more question to you, Iona, and in a way it brings me back to the interview in Morgenbladet and loneliness, dying alone, and the thing about grief. You, in one of your articles this year, you have written about grief, and you've highlighted the grief of the disadvantaged. So, if I understand you correctly, if we are to understand people's grief from losses incurred due to the coronavirus, we need to acknowledge that some are more exposed than others, to acknowledge that some communities have been significantly more exposed to loss of parents and life partners and children. And you mentioned the concept of structural violence, which may need some explaining. So communities that are subject to structural violence have been more exposed both to the virus and to the measures that have been put in place. Can you explain this a bit?
Yeah, so structural violence is the sort of institutional violence that is perpetrated on people by the structure of society and through no fault of their own. So it's disadvantage as a result of race, poverty, gender.
Did you know it's a Norwegian concept? It was discovered by Johan Galtung, so it's a Norwegian concept in 1969.
Well, congratulations, Norway. It's a very,
sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
It's a very, very good and useful concept, and it's, disadvantaged people, as in the story, had to keep working. A lot of them were in actually frontline crucial jobs, so were obliged to keep working. Supermarket stackers, delivery makers. We had a lot of bus drivers die, and then there's the whole question of race. And our studies, and as you say, we've had a lot of material, shows that even when you control for everything you can think of, like income and housing situation, there is still a race thing, which is presumably to do with the structural violence of racism. And it's really striking. I can't remember the exact proportion, but it's a hugely excessive proportion of the doctors and nurses who have died come from ethnic minorities. And the first 10 or something were all from ethnic minorities, which just, in a way, because this is an advantaged population, doctors, and that just says it all, really. And then when you take the circumstances of lockdown, I live in a big house, as you know, Stefán, and we've got a small garden, and it wasn't, and the weather was lovely. It's much less pleasant now, I have to say. It was pretty nice. But if you were stuck in a small flat in a tower block with an abusive partner and small children that you were supposed to be homeschooling, that is a hellish situation compared with what we had to put up with and other people. Other lucky baby boomers had to put up with.
Thank you, Iona. Katrine, one of the topics that came up in the discussion with Iona was loneliness and bereavement, being alone and being without facilities and human contact that you usually have and that you crave for. I think we should have the second of your stories, because in the story of Johannes, I think there is a lot of loneliness.
Johannes. Johannes is 39 years old, and he is a migrant without legal stay. He fled from prosecution in his home country 10 years ago because of his religious beliefs. His application for asylum has been rejected. Because of the situation in his home country, he cannot return neither by force nor voluntarily. He lives in an asylum center. Because he does not have legal stay in Norway, he has limited access to healthcare. Johannes struggles with trauma and mental illness. He receives treatment for his illness at the health center for undocumented migrants run by Kirkens Bymisjon and the Red Cross. His situation is challenging under normal circumstances and has worsened significantly during the lockdown. Normally, he participates in activities arranged by volunteers at the asylum center. These activities are important to Johannes. The company of others prevents loneliness and contributes to a sense of meaning in his everyday life. This is a key factor in preventing relapses and managing his mental illness. The treatment he receives by a volunteer psychologist at the health center is a paramount. Without treatment, his mental health quickly deteriorates and his symptoms of post-traumatic stress intensify. During lockdown, Johannes experienced a severe relapse of his symptoms. The activities he normally participates in closed down, and the health center had to close for 2 months. He felt lonely and isolated and was unable to cope with his anxiety. He went to the emergency room for help, where he was examined by a doctor. Johannes was not considered to be ill enough to qualify for emergency help and was sent home without any plan for follow-up. As a result, Johannes isolated himself in his room. He describes the situation as being invisible and forgotten. He has trouble understanding why he was not offered more help during lockdown. Does he not have the same human rights as everyone else?
Having heard about Johannes, I want to turn to Tone in Vienna. Tone, in June, you and a group of Norwegian, let me say, intellectuals published in several Norwegian newspapers simultaneously, I think. You published a call for change, a call for system change. And in this piece, you argued that the COVID crisis has exposed weaknesses, fundamental weaknesses of the economic system of our society, and that this is a golden opportunity for change. And it seems to me that the core principle of the economic system that you want us to abandon is the principle of growth, actually. The belief that people prosper, that our lives are good, to the extent that production and consumption keep growing. Now, this is a rather radical idea, isn't it? That we should abandon the principle of economic growth. or?
Yes and no, I will say. And I will explain why. Just a couple of things first, because we were not, I want to say that we were not only intellectuals or academics, but there were 75 people signing up to this petition, and there were former politicians, even a minister from the Conservative Party, former minister from the Conservative Party, which we're very happy to get on board. Former bishops, artists, and yes, many academics, but also writers and farmers. So it was quite a broad spectrum of people, and also geographically and age-wise and gender-wise. So this was important for us. And the other thing I wanted to say initially is that it was not an opportunistic thing that we initiated because of Corona, but it was actually planned last autumn as a call for systems change, or a call that we need to discuss system change now in the coming year, as we are heading towards the next parliamentary elections in Norway in the autumn of 2021. So so this was the background, and so we actually wanted to call for system change before Corona came, but then, as the call stated, this crisis shows many of the same weaknesses that we wanted to raise anyway about the current economic system in particular that we have. So yes, it is radical to question economic growth. I mean, this is the core of our economic system. It is even the core of modern mental vision for living a good life. It's what politicians talk about. Is the mainstream political and economic discourse. It's, we see it now in the Corona crisis time. How can we get back to normal and get the economy going again? This is the big preoccupation. So in this respect, it is radical. But in one way, it's also not radical, because already 50 years ago, in the 70s, it was clear knowledge for politicians and many people that economic growth happened on at the cost of environmental conditions, that economic growth and the state of the environment were not compatible. So the more industrialization, the more economic activity, the more load on the environment. Then what happened was that this was kind of abandoned, this knowledge or this insight, and we got the concept of sustainable development. We got the Brundtland Commission that Norwegians are very proud of, which proposed that actually we could just change the content of growth. And in this way, we can transfer from industry to service sector activities and so on. And in this way, we will solve this contradiction between economic growth and environmental conditions. And we even need economic growth to save many environmental problems, it was claimed. And the poor definitely need economic growth to get out of their poverty. So this has been the discourse now for 40 years or so, and it's become stronger and stronger. So in a way, it is radical to reintroduce some of that obvious knowledge from 50 years back. At the same time, there is actually a growing recognition that we cannot continue like we do. And I think for many non-intellectuals, this is it's a self-evident truth that nothing can grow continuously. It just doesn't work. It's just simple logic, right? Still, this is the political goals, and it's the political discourse. And maybe what has helped move the debate forward is that we're not only talking about environmental issues, environmental problems related to the system, but things that were already exposed in the stories that were told, both from Norway and the UK, that this growth economy has a lot of disadvantaged people suffering. And so the corona crisis, it's not just because of the corona crisis that they are suffering, it was already there before. The structural violence were there before. Galtung came up with this theory in the 70s already about structural violence, or also his theory of structural theory of imperialism. It's not only about the disadvantaged in our countries, it's about how people in the global south are systematically the ones who lose out from this continuous growth machine that in Norway in particular, most people don't suffer so much materially from this growth economy, but there is somebody who pays the price here. And so there is a growing international movement focusing on this, what is called environmental justice, that there are people who pay the price for our material economic growth, which mostly is channeled to the north or to the advantaged group of the south. So this is the kind of, this was the background story for the call, and why we already before Corona crisis said, look, we really need to challenge this model. We're undermining our own life support system, especially due to the climate crisis and biodiversity, loss of biodiversity, but there is also a social side to this, and it's really time that we start to address this. Since the financial crisis 10 years ago, it's only gone the wrong way. The rich become richer, the poor become poorer, and also even maybe this is also where there lies some hope, that even the supposedly advantaged in Norway or global north, who have good jobs and an income, are not happy with this life. There is a sense of stress, not being able to really enjoy life, being locked into this rat race of trying to achieve something that we don't really know what it is. Yeah, so maybe that's enough to start with.
Yeah, and I think now might be the right time to bring the discussion closer to the COVID situation and how we as a society have managed the pandemic. Now, you're an economist, and during spring and summer, I noticed that here in Norway, some of your Norwegian colleagues, they were, I mean, in public debate, in the media, they were among the first people who started to question in a very polite and in a very polite way and carefully to question whether the lockdown of society to save lives might do, in some respects, too much harm. So some prominent Norwegian economists have been, since late spring, summer, they've been arguing that this is not just about saving the lives of people who otherwise might die from COVID-19. And they have pointed out that the measures taken to prevent deaths from COVID-19, they carry a price. And perhaps if this involves decreasing productivity too much, it's a too high price. Do you agree that this is an argument we should take seriously?
I think they mostly discuss not so much productivity, but economic growth.
Yeah, sorry.
It's the growth
economic,
issue again, right?
Mm.
Growth and unemployment. And then also some of the issues that Iona raised about children not being in school and students not being able to meet their fellow students and things like that. But the core debate very soon centered around, was it really worth it in terms of money? And, you know, in Norway, they set up a commission who was going to look into the economic effects. So it's very much about the economic effects, including unemployment. Yeah, and given what I just said, of course, I find this perspective completely uninteresting in a way. I mean, this is the problem, that we are living in a growth economy, which is already a problem to us. So the fact that, or it's not uninteresting, it's problematic that what they now want to do is as soon as possible to get back to normal. And in our petition and call was exactly about getting out of this normality of the growth machine economy. So actually, I think it was quite interesting that it went so far with this crisis that something for a short time was more important than economic growth. Now we can discuss, all the specific measures that were taken and the consequences of that. I definitely think we should discuss it, but that there was actually something that was taken more serious than economic growth was interesting from my perspective. And I don't think it came easily. The big corporations were quickly in meetings with government, and the lobby groups were there, and there wasn't any immediate lockdown. It took time before, and in some countries longer than others, exactly because of the economic interests. And probably exactly so that the big corporation could already plan their claims for bailouts and so on. So, I mean, this is the other problem with the crisis like this, is that the same thing happened as 10 years ago and has happened before, which Naomi Klein has pointed out in her book, The Shock Doctrine, which came out even before the financial crisis in 2008, where she uses the word disaster capitalism about it, that the big and powerful corporations are at it straight away, and they manage to profit the most from even a crisis such like this. And this is, of course, really tragic, but I still feel that, that to go back to try to get the economy going in the old way as soon as possible is not at all what we should aim for now. We should discuss exactly what we see that a crisis unveils, because crises are a repetition in our economic system. They come regularly, and every time. And the more we have actually made things in our economic life part of the market system, the more each economic downturn is problematic for people, especially those who lose their jobs. So the thing is not that unemployment isn't important. Of course, it's important that people lose their jobs and unemployment figures rise. But an even more deeper problem is that we are so dependent on this wage labor to have a livelihood in the first place. And this is one of the things that we would like to raise with this petition, to start a debate about why we are organizing our economy like that. Why is it only that? Why is it that only education and health is covered by? Is outside of the market, at least in Norway, the basic services for the time being. Why not discuss other basic needs like food and shelter? These are also actually human rights. They are in the Declaration of Human Rights. They're considered economic human rights. And this is the main reason why unemployment becomes so dramatic for many people, that they lose their basic way to fulfill their basic human rights or their basic needs. Now there is the other side of it, which is a kind of a different debate, which is that in Western society so much of our identity is related to our job, and even our social spheres. So if people don't go to work, many people don't have friends or family in this kind of loneliness community that we have, especially people who live in cities. So this is another side of why unemployment becomes so difficult. But yeah, this is also something we need to address. We should address it as an underlying problem, not just try to create as many jobs as soon as possible again. And even, whatever the job is, it's a bit unqualified. Just this economic growth is an unqualified good. So David Graeber has written this book called Bullshit Jobs, which basically discusses the problem with so much of our identity in the Western world linked up to our job, and at the same time so many of us are doing jobs that we find meaningless. And this is an existential problem for us. Why do we not discuss these issues in society? Why do we just want to create more jobs for the sake of more jobs? And just one last thing, the same goes for GDP, that we have we've for a long time been in this paradigm that any economic growth it doesn't matter what kind, economic growth is good, right? So we have one aggregate figure, all economic activity counts the same and end up in this GDP figure. While actually now during the corona crisis, this was suddenly changed because politicians had to or decided to distinguish between essential economic activities and non-essential economic activities. And I think as a researcher, this is a really interesting opportunity to look at something that finally we were forced to do in society, to say, yeah, there are some things that are much more essential than other activities, and this is something we should continue to stress in the future, I believe.
So to mix your two final points, the situation has made politicians and economists distinguish between essential production, essential jobs, and bullshit jobs. So bullshit production, which is not essential in the same sense. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tone. We are coming towards the close of this part of the discussion. There is a final story that Katrine will tell us now, and then I will open up for the discussion afterwards. Katrine, there is a final story with two persons in it, with Paul and Sarah, who are married.
Yes. Paul and Sarah. Paul is 56 years old and from a poor community in Eastern Europe. He and his wife Sarah travel to Norway for longer periods of time each year to make a living by collecting bottles and begging. They provide for their 4 children who live with their grandparents in their home country. Before the European borders closed in March, Paul and his wife were offered financial support from NAV to travel home. Most of their friends and acquaintances in similar life situations decided to take the offer and left Norway in the early days of the lockdown. Paul and Sarah decided to stay, hoping to make some money. They were worried that they would have to take their children out of school if they went home, as they have little hope of making a living in their hometown. This was a difficult choice for Paul and Sarah, as they also worry for their children and want to be close to them in a very difficult situation. Both Sarah and Paul struggled emotionally because of this. Life was extremely difficult for Paul and Sarah during lockdown in Bergen. The city center was deserted. There were no bottles to collect, and very few people gave them money. Because of the income loss, Paul and Sarah have to take their youngest girl out of school. Paul and Sarah could stay in Kirkens Bymisjon's emergency shelter from 9 p.m. till 8 a.m. every day. But the days were long and tiresome. Daytime shelters for people in need had limited opening hours and could only accommodate a limited number of people due to the infection control. As a result, it was hard for Paul and Sarah to find shelter and food during daytime. They were hungry and exhausted. In shopping malls, kiosks, etc., where they normally would be allowed to use the toilets and take a break from life on the streets, they were shushed away by security guards. Paul describes his situation as being treated worse than rats.
Thank you. Thank you, Katrine. Now, I have a question that I want to really put to the three of you. I might invite Iona to go first, but this is a question in the making, so I might not be totally clear here. Now, I started out by mentioning that a crisis is something that threatens the things we hold dear, and we become acutely aware of a threat, a loss, and we've been trying to illuminate some of the losses, and thus we've been trying to illuminate the things we hold dear, our values. And we go to, in a crisis, we go to great lengths to protect the things we hold dear, and gradually we realize some of the complexities of now we are trying to prevent people from dying, but that the measures we take, they have different side effects, and maybe some other values are also threatened, and that's what we've been trying to illuminate. And Tone mentioned that a crisis can unveil something. We can see more clearly what are our important values and how our activities are protecting and promoting values, for whom and at what cost. And I'm wondering at this point, what has this crisis told us about what can we learn about the things we hold dear and the measures we need to take to protect them? Iona, you might want to answer simply by talking about care homes again, how to protect what is dear to old people and dying people. I don't know if that's where you want to start. I'm not sure.
Well, I'd like to. I have argued for a long time, and this has only made me more convinced that one of the foundational values needs to be that the quality of a life is more important than its length in numbers.
So a really strong emphasis on...
You're really quiet, Stefán. Can your microphone be turned up? No, that's better.
Quality of life is very important, you are saying, not just the length, the duration of an existence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We've completely lost sight of the old saying. No, I'm going to get into terrible trouble for saying this, but pneumonia is the old man's friend. I lost a very close friend, probably from COVID. One of my trainees last year, or maybe even 2018, developed what the hell is it called? Mad cow disease. What's it? Jakob Creutzfeldt.
Yeah, mad cow disease. Mm.
Mad cow disease of an idiopathic sort, and she was deteriorated dreadfully, and she lost all her faculties, and she was looked after wonderfully by her family, and then at the beginning of COVID, she got a slight fever for a few days, and she just died. And that was kind of it was with her family around her, and it was it was as good as it could possibly be in those appallingly tragic circumstances. And yet that would be somehow regarded as some sort of failure. I can't see that could ever be regarded as some sort of failure. It was kind of unbelievably timely, and it's something to do with the way we value nowadays, and I'm sure Turner will agree, even though economics is based entirely on numbers, or almost. We value numbers over almost anything. Numbers are the metric. There is no other metric. And I think it's having the most devastating effects on how we think about things and people, and because we're constantly counting, and if I can't remember who, it's the old we count the unimportant, and we count the countable, and we don't count what can't be counted. And yet those are some of the most important things. And while I'm speaking, I do want Turner to talk about universal basic income, because I don't see how you can stop growth unless you do something about social justice at the same time. And in English, I think it's very appropriate that growth and greed seem to have the same start in life. And Peter Townsend used to argue you can never do anything about poverty until you deal with the problem of the rich. It's not the poor that are the problem is the rich.
Tone, with hindsight, with the hindsight of only half a year, what have we learned about our values? What can we learn from this crisis about our values?
What have we learned? Is that what you said, Stefan? Because we don't hear you. So, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. What can we learn by now about the things we hold dear?
The question is quite tricky, because I could answer trying to assess what we humanity have learned, or I can speak from my own position. So, and I am not sure what we as a collective have learned. This I'm really not sure about at all. I think different people has learned very different things from it. So I will rather answer it from the perspective that I have been speaking from all the time. And I would then just very much like to mirror Iona's wish to focus on quality of life, because this is also the kind of economy that we are trying to promote, or the kind of economic system that we would like to see coming into place, or at least discuss how we can get a change so that we can focus on qualities instead. And it is true, economists are very much focused on numbers in general and quantities, but I think it's not only economists, but it's the capitalist system. It is a numeric. It's a system about profit and numbers and efficiency, and all these things are about quantities. And economists in particular have become very one-sided. I will just like to take the occasion here, since it's mentioned in the program that I am also part of Rethinking Economics in Norway, which is an organization which exactly wants to promote both within economic education but also in society that there are different ways to study the economy and to discuss the economy. There is not only this one theory that has become dominant at universities all over the world almost in the last decades, which focus very much on efficiency and the quantitative aspect of it. So, trying to discuss quality of life from an economic perspective might seem impossible, but it is not impossible, because economics can also be about how do we organize for social provisioning? How do we organize ourselves to fulfill our basic needs? It doesn't need to be about a numeric, quantitative, abstract world. It can be about how do we fulfill our basic needs. Okay, maybe it's not as efficient as trying to produce as much as possible all the time. Well, maybe this is a better life. Let's start the debate. And this is one of the things I hope that this crisis might have revealed. At some point, there were a lot of people who seemed to be debating more, what really matters in life and so on. But as soon as we have the main political discussion is just about how to get growth going again and get back into our jobs, whatever kind of jobs they are, then much haven't changed really. And so I really hope we can keep this momentum to discuss other kinds of values in society than this quantitative aspect.
And can I come in? No. Yeah?
Please.
Because I think the broader lesson of so much you're talking about in terms of the dominance of number and the loss of, is exactly what's happening in COVID. So if we can make a focused and determined critique of the effect of numbers on quality and values just in the COVID epidemic, then it ripples over into almost everything else.
Thank you, Tone and Iona. I wonder if we could finish this round, Katrine, by mentioning how would we put it in English, the value foundation of the church city mission, because part of what we are discussing here is a difficulty that we are having to put into words the things that really matter. Iona mentions that this focus on quantity, on numbers, makes it more difficult to discuss quality of life and things that are important to humans. And whereas it struck me when I contacted you at the Church City Mission that your institution has a very clear value base. You might want to say a few words about that.
Yes, we are an organization who wants to fight for justice and care for everyone, independently if they are poor or rich or ill or where do you come from. So we want to see everybody as humans with the same rights and the same possibilities to receive care and be well treated. So in this situation of the pandemic, it was, of course, very special for us also to work with vulnerable groups, and but also having to go into the dugnad of not spreading the virus, and it was quite a difficult situation of knowing where to find the balance between caring for people and protecting ourselves, protecting everyone. Yeah.
But as you say, caring for people, treating them humanely, and seeking to maintain as much social justice as possible in spite of this situation. Yes,
because our jobs is to try to fill the gaps where the welfare state is not functioning, or for people who doesn't feel that they receive the same services as everybody else. So trying to fill that gap is our job, and
yes, and my point is exactly that this is a clear value statement, and it is about values that have been threatened not just by the virus itself, but also by our handling of the pandemic. I want to now open up for questions and comments from the audience who are here, and as a first part of that, if Carolina and Emilia have want to contribute, we will do that now.
Yes, so
Carolina?
So we had a question from YouTube, one of the people streaming. So thank you for a very good discussion. And I think some of the things you have put forward is some of the challenges we have with regards to sorting what is most important for us, where we have put numbers very high. And when we're in a crisis, flow of information seems to be very important, both to understand the situation that we're in, but also as a mean of communication between the government and the population with regards to how we should respond to the crisis that we're in. So there's a question with regards to the role of social media when it comes to flow of information. And the question is, social media, such as Facebook, are now to some extent censoring health information, which is too much in discordance with the government narrative. How has the designation fake news become a tool to weed out government critics? Does any one of you have any thoughts with regards to the role of social media and how social media influence information consumption in a crisis like this?
Stefán, can I just ask, this is not being streamed any longer, the answers, yes, or the debate now?
Sorry, Tone, I didn't put this perfectly clear. I decided to continue the streaming for the prepared and anonymous questions and comments. So we are still being streamed for a little bit longer. Okay. So you have one answer if it's streamed and one answer if it's not?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not an expert in it, right? So it feels easier to reflect a bit lightly if it's not streamed, let's say. I'm not an expert on social media.
But I think the issues of human rights underpin it, and I think they're much more extensive than just the censoring of Facebook. I mean, we've already got all these old people in solitary confinement. We've got children being deprived of education. We've got people paying for university courses that amount to a succession of Zoom meetings. We've got, and we've got the so-called NHS COVID tracker, which is nothing to do with the NHS. It's been, subcontracted to private providers. With no, and whenever that happens with our joke of a government, whenever that happens, the data that is collected is then sold on to various interested parties without any consent. And so there are people like me who are certainly not going to use this COVID tracker app until we get some guarantees about what the privacy standards are. People are being panicked into giving away their rights. I'm sure on a much lesser scale in a civilized country like Norway, but in a country like mine, where the government is the joke of Europe, really, they're so incompetent. It's really serious what I think is happening to citizens' rights, using COVID as an excuse for things that governments have always wanted to do. The levels of surveillance have shot up, and it's shameful, and only time will tell how bad that is, how much civil rights have been eroded.
Yeah, I could follow up maybe actually, because I think the same issue applies very much in Norway. And there were the same debates around the app. Some people are outraged about others hesitant, to use it because that they might, you could save one person's life with this app, and now you're saying no to it because of other principles. And it's suddenly the same kind of only one principle matters, as if we are not constantly living our lives at the cost of other people's lives so much, which is my main concern, how we are living at the cost of people in the South all the time. But this is, suddenly it's about the app, then these kind of arguments come to the forefront. So I agree, there is an extreme lack of understanding of Facebook and all this in general. It's not only to do with the COVID, and this worries me almost more than the fact that there seems to be some critical doctors whose talks on YouTube has been taken off. Of course, this is worrying. I don't know why it happens specifically, but these things happen all the time. I mean, our society is not, even though we like to believe it, it is not free in these terms of freedom of exchange of information and so on. It's being controlled a lot behind the scenes. And I think Norwegians are extremely naive in this respect. There is no counter movement or organizations to oversee this or anything.
And the other way they annex power is by government, states have annexed the assessment of risk. Individuals are no longer able to assess their own risk. I'm 70, I'm supposed to be an increased risk group. I'd go and see my grandchildren, why can't I assess my own risk rather than having it imposed from above? And when I was talking to you before, Stefán, I am definitely feeling the lack of Per Fugelli, who would have been very vocal on this annexation of risk. He was all for people taking their own risks and making a richer society, richer in the quality meaning of it rather than the financial meaning of it, because of the ability of different people to assess their own levels of risk.
But here I might have a slight objection, or at least something that we could discuss, which is that we are, for example, not allowed to assess our own risk when we drive a car and just drive as fast as we want and so on. So there are already these kind of precautions in society, partly so that to protect other people from whatever we assess as a risk okay to take, but also to protect ourselves. And then do we really want to completely eliminate this?
No.
And if we want to, no. And if we, especially if we want society to take care of us if we have an accident, or I find it okay that there is some, that the government can take some of these measures, but that doesn't mean that in this specific case that grandparents can't see their grandchildren, that this was necessarily the right.
And people can't see their ancient parents in care homes and all that sort of thing. And I think it's entirely reasonable that I can't go to Norway without having to quarantine. I think that there are things, but I think that it's like the previous part of the conversation. Advantage is being taken. Yes. To increase control over the population and what people are doing, and I think that aspect of it is very sinister. It's also very interesting. If you make people wear seatbelts, they drive faster and you get more pedestrian deaths, less motorist deaths. It's the same thing. Mask wearers get closer to people. That's very interesting. At least that's my understanding, is that if you're wearing a mask, you feel that you don't have to maintain a 6-foot distance, and who the hell knows which is the most effective intervention. I'm not convinced by anything, but I mean, it seems to me that there's a debate there. But so people take compensatory risks if they feel themselves protected.
There's a question from the audience. Emilia?
Hello, my name is Emilia, and I'm a student. So I got caught up on this conversation in the beginning from Iona about the generational gap, or the what the focuses are on the different generations. We have the older generations, like you talk about, Iona, about the limitations for the older people in care homes and such, and you also talk about the limitations for students. And we talk about the negatives of Corona this entire time, and I can't help but feel that we overshadow the positive parts that also come out from the COVID-19 situation, because I'm from a generation that's always underestimated and at the same time constantly over-expectated. We're expected to always provide and push limits and create economic growth for the future and for the country and for the state and all that such. And Tone, you used the word opportunistic, and it's always used negatively, I feel, and I don't understand why. Of course, there's situations where opportunistic is not positive, but also I feel like this situation, we should be opportunistic. We've been giving a completely unique situation to make changes. Should it be economic? Should it be social? And of course, there's negative whiplashes that, Iona, you are talking about. And nobody enjoyed lockdown. It was terrible for everyone. But now that we're living in a in-between, I find that it's somewhat a relief. Because like I said, I'm from a generation that's always expected to do too much. Like we say in Norway, we have the flink pike syndrome, the good girl syndrome. And I think my generation has been feeling the weight of that. And now that we are allowed to use technology to create shortcuts, I know my life has become more, I'm being able to conquer all the balls that I have in the air at all times, because we are now able to use technology to not stress ourselves out. We don't have to show up to everything. We can go into Zoom, and that way being able to just live our lives. And Tone, you talked about the rich not being able to enjoy their wealth and not being able to enjoy their privilege, and that's what I feel like my generation have not been able to do, and now maybe we have. So my question is, do we have to go back? Do we want to? Is the goal to go back to the way things were, or can we be so gruesome to be opportunistic to make a better life? And even though there are negatives, should we not be able to create a better world and take this opportunity and make COVID to a turning point in history?
Go for it. Yes, go for it. It's your generation that needs to do that. And I am so heartened by the fact that you can see all these advantages, and I think that is fantastic. But as Tone has pointed out, it will take a huge amount of effort to overcome the weight that is wanting to, the corporate weight that is wanting things to be the same. Mm-hmm. But if it's to trigger a generational, another young generation that will change the world, then hooray.
Yeah, I totally agree, of course. The reason I said we didn't want to be opportunistic was because we generally felt it like that we had planned to release this petition in March, then the crisis hit, and that we should really, this is not the time to do this. Let's see what happens. It was a lot of discomfort about what this really entailed. And then, of course, there are others who don't do that, who immediately see the opportunities. And those people are mostly the ones that we don't want to associate us with. So I think this is the reason that I said that, and also because opportunistic is usually used in this kind of a negative sense to profit from a crisis in a way that is not for the good of all. But if we could use the word opportunistic to profit in a way that's good for all, I totally agree. I mean, of course, yeah, all I've said is that the best would be not to go back to normal. This is what we wanted to work for at the outset, a different normal. Now, you know, in my perspective, this might not be so much linked to doing meetings at Zoom and so on. I find it a bit tiring to constantly sit in front of a screen. My own experience was that it was very nice to have a garden and be able to be outside a lot during the corona crisis, that it was quiet, there was no traffic, there was no airplanes constantly over our house. Things like this is what for me was the opportunity and like the nice experience. But we all have different experiences, and I totally understand this generational issue of pressure to perform. I mean, this is one of the main social problems of our time, and I think if we put all these challenges together, and then all of us see something in the current situation that we would like to, that should stay, that Corona brought to us, that was good about the shutdown, and what's it called? Highlight that. Let's talk about it. Let's say that that was a good thing that we would like to change, or we want to change society to have more of that. But of course, now I'm putting additional pressure on whoever it was who spoke to say you need to spend some time in the public arena and get these demands forward, and that will mean that you have more to do.
Yes.
Okay. We've now come to the end of the part of this meeting that is being streamed. So thank you to those who have been following the streaming, and to those who will watch this later on. So the streaming ends now. We have a few minutes for questions and discussion.